Today we're going to go over the difference between relative frequency and cumulative relative frequency. And we're going to be using this problem from the Practice of Statistics textbook, the updated edition, to do so. Now let's get started. There are 25 students in Mr. Tabor's class, statistics class. He gives them a first test worth 50 points. Here are the students' scores. Okay, the score marked in red, in this case blue right here, is Emily's 43, okay, 43. How did she perform on this test relative to her classmate? Now, we can do two things, okay? So again, we're going to do relative frequency, and we're also going to focus on cumulative. Relative frequency. Okay? Now, relative frequency is basically telling you how many times, the percentage of how many times a student scores 43 in context, right, in this case, okay? So, how many times does a student score 43 in this class? If you count, obviously, only one time. So 1 out of 25 students, where do we get 25? 25 students, right? That's the total number of students, total number of data points. 1 out of 25 scored 43. So if we want to get the percentage, we're going to multiply that by 100, and that's going to end up being 4%, okay? So we're going to interpret this value in a little while, okay? But let's move on to cumulative relative frequency. So what you do here is that you actually count how many data points, or in this case students, scored less than and equal to that 43, okay? So if you count them all up, that's going to end up being 21 over 25, and if you want to get the percentage, right, the frequency, you want to multiply that by 100, and that's going to end up being 84%. So now let's interpret these values and differentiate between them, okay? So the 4% means that only 4% of the students scored a 43. So this is useful in a pie chart. You can say, okay, well, 4% of the students, this little piece right here, this is basically the score distribution. They scored a 43, 43, okay? Now, cumulative relative frequency basically says, okay, well, the students who scored less than and equal to 43 are in the 84th percentile. So Emily is in the 84th percentile. You can say that Emily is in the 84th percentile. And you can't just say that. You have to explain what this means. Okay, well, Emily's in the 84th percentile, meaning she scored better than 84% of the students. Okay? We can also say that we can't say that Emily scored 4%. We can say that the students, so 4% out of the students, so this says 4% of the students scored a 43, because a 4% of the 25 students, or we could just say students, it doesn't really matter, scored a 43 on the test, on the stat test. And that's how we interpret those values, okay? So using a percentile, finding the cumulative relative frequency helps you interpret the individual values. So it helps you interpret or compare how Emily did in comparison or relative to the other students. So we can say Emily's in the 84th percentile, right? Meaning that she scored better than 84% of the students, because 84% of the students are all of these students here who make up that data. This is 84%. So if you take a look at it, right, really, this right here, all these students make up 84% of the 84% of the scores, okay? So that makes up 84% of the students' scores, right? Which means that only 16% scored better than Emily, okay? Only 16% of the students in the class scored better than Emily, and 84% of the students in the class scored at least scored less than or equal to 43. Okay, so that is the difference between relative frequency and cumulative relative frequency, and the interpretations you can make with each of them.